Hi, I'm Maria Bedoya, Research and Insight Coordinator. Welcome to Sussex Pioneers Episode 3, Easier, Better, Faster, Cheaper, which is about how lean principles can transform your business. This episode does exactly what it says on the tin. It's all about driving performance improvement through the adoption of relevant tools and techniques to make small incremental changes. Lean principles are straightforward. For the best outcomes, lean thinking needs to be embedded as part of the culture from the leadership through the empowerment of employees. Here is Paul Nightingale, Professor of Strategy from University of Sussex Business School, to explain lean thinking and how it fits into your innovation process.
How can you navigate a small business through constant change while keeping your team invested, engaged, and pulling in the same direction? Lean thinking began in the world of mass manufacturing, but since the 1980s it has spread across different sectors and from big businesses to small firms. As well as providing operational efficiency, the benefit of lean is that it creates a platform for continuous improvement and innovation. The concept of lean production as we know it today was developed by my colleague Andrew Graves when he was working here at SPRU, the Science Policy Research Unit, back in the 1980s and 90s. Professor Graves' research was part of the Machine That Changed the World project led by MIT. It sought to understand how Japanese car producers were able to be so innovative and effective. The project revealed a new model of innovation that would revolutionise how processes were managed within firms and how businesses looked outwards to their supply chains and customers. The Toyota production system is the defining example of lean thinking. Toyota's model involves understanding which parts of their process create value and minimising wasted resources. They innovate in parallel from the top down and bottom up, constantly seeking ways to make small changes and measure how effective those changes have been. This involves communicating well between different teams to manage the consequences of change. Everyone across the company is encouraged to reflect as an everyday part of their job, rather than using a rigid review process. For small firms and startups, lean principles can help to manage uncertainties about technologies, customers and business models. It means accepting some of these uncertainties and building a culture of learning to continuously improve customer satisfaction and performance. The lean startup approach developed by Eric Riles uses short, fast experiments rather than cumbersome project plans that can lead to expensive dead ends. He recommends developing a minimal viable product to gain valuable feedback and data that will inform and improve your idea. Lean thinking helps businesses to optimise the financial performance of their assets and builds in enough agility to pivot quickly when customer feedback or external shocks force a sudden change of strategic direction. Ultimately, lean thinking is about building and supporting a culture of continuous improvement with a relentless focus on customer value. Let's look now at how some businesses have adopted lean methods.
Innovation is a really good question. I actually find it's quite a scary word at a small business level. People have the anticipation that it means something big, it's something that's going to add some massive value to your underlying business model. It's not that way. It's small things that you can do which can change a process, can add value, an idea from somebody that you can implement that will ultimately mean that you are a more efficient business in the longer term. How are we a lean business? We have weekly checks that we do to make sure that we actually are lean. The things that we look for is revenue against cost, simple as that. We look at last year's data as a benchmark for the same week in the previous year, and if we're not lean, we'll have specific actions that we'll do on a weekly level with our management team. First of all, it's internally. We made a lot of mistakes at the beginning. We overspent. We had too much staff. Our revenue lines weren't as what we expected. So you learn the hard way. You make a financial mistake and you don't do it again the following week or the following month. Experiences, yes, I used to assist small businesses on raising money in the Middle East, and I used to see it firsthand, and you don't feel it until it's your own business. Future-proofing our business to be lean, there's a big question to be answered there about what is that, where would the compromise come? So are we going to be leaner to the fact that we are going to compromise our customer service, our product lines, our staffing levels? So that's the biggest problem that we've got. We're a hospitality business at the end of the day, and we pride ourselves on offering excellent customer service. And if you start stripping down staff so that that experience starts to diminish, then it'll impact our business.
When we're purchasing, we don't always get it right. Sometimes we take on a product that we think might sell, but actually it doesn't land. Or we are asked to stock a product that actually we thought wouldn't go with our brand, but then it flies off the shelf. When you're looking at taking on a product that fails in terms of its sales, we've got to work really closely with the supplier to get them to understand why that is. And sometimes it's quite simply because it needs better shelf presence, it might need better packaging, and we do get that issue particularly with local product because packaging is a real challenge for producers. Or it might be that actually there isn't a need in the market for it. And it's all about having that honest relationship to feed that information back.
20 years ago, I suppose, we started seeing digitalisation come in, and that provided us with two options. One was the ability to sell direct to the public through the website, and the other was to reproduce quality artwork digitally, which meant that we could produce to order. So print on demand was an absolutely invaluable part of the business process growing, because we no longer needed to have a warehouse full of prints. We could have a warehouse full of printing machines, and that meant that customers could choose the size that they wanted. So there was a huge amount of change, and the way we did our pre-press was completely digital rather than mechanical. When you embark on any journey where you're transitioning from analog to digital, or even within digital to another level of digitalization, there's constantly going to be things that you think you need that perhaps you don't need. So I think in the past we've bought programs that didn't work, we've bought machinery that doesn't work, and you have to really learn to cut your losses before it becomes overwhelming and accept the fact that you've made those mistakes. So the technology changes have been unbelievably accelerated and vast in the last 20 years. And a business has to learn to constantly keep up with those.
The positioning that we've chosen for King & McGaw is quality first. This is important particularly for our museum clients, many of whom are blue chip businesses themselves, and quality is essential. So the art print industry actually is relatively new. From the early 80s. Prior to that, it didn't really exist. There were bedroom door posters, but not art posters as such. And King & McGaw was one of the lead companies in that transition. Back in those days, we had in excess of 5,000 square feet of storage dedicated only to paper. The transition to POD, print on demand, really was driven by commercial necessity. So now we are able to print to customer order. The footprint that we have for storage is maybe 10 or 15% of what it once was. Plus we're able to respond to changes in customer demand very readily. Working practices such as 5S, 7 wastes, as well as investing in a number of sophisticated machines. In the last 24 months, we've invested some approaching £1 million across a number of major investments. But a particular challenge that then presents is finding the staff to operate these more sophisticated pieces of machinery, plus who can get on board with changed working practices.
Welcome. Let's meet our guests who are going to speak to us about lean. Could you introduce yourselves?
Yes, my name is Peter Lane from Sussex Innovation, and I work with technology startups and scale-ups as well as academics to bring new disruptive technologies to market.
I'm Fiona Bennett and I'm from Sussex Innovation. My specialism is lean thinking in business transformations and developing a continuous improvement culture.
My name's Gear King. I'm CEO and founder of King & McGaw. We make museum frames and prints for the public, which we sell online, and we also make beautiful product for museum shops.
Great, thanks Gear.
I'm Craig Hewitt. I'm co-owner of Exo Apple's Farm Shop in Hurst Green, and we are a farm shop stroke food retail business.
Lovely to meet you, Craig. So let's start with the question. Fiona, you're the expert. What is lean?
Well, lean actually has its origins in manufacturing, specifically the Toyota production system of the 1970s and Japanese manufacturing culture there. And it is ultimately about reducing waste from the business practices, any activities that create waste, and creating flow of value to the customer. Ultimately, the customer actually underpins, the voice of the customer underpins what lean is about.
Does anyone see similarities to those principles in how you run your businesses?
Absolutely. I think the term lean in manufacturing, what we see is basically day-to-day operations.
Right.
We have a culture inside our business where we try to ensure that we have just-in-time delivery. We do that because of the nature of the business. Everything's predominantly fresh or freshly ordered or freshly delivered. So kind of shelf life plays a big important part of that. If you miss the shelf life, if you get, let's say for example, your shelf life ticks on a certain day and you miss that by 24 hours, then you've got a day less at the end of that particular process to sell the product. But what we do anyway from inception of the business is to manage our stock very tightly anyway. But for me, lean isn't just necessarily about business practices or processes. It's actually about cash flow. So how you keep a lean business running on a tight cash flow model. Also looking at how you can turn around and make differences very quickly in your personnel. So being able to turn the business around very quickly. COVID was a very good example of that for us. But more importantly, just to ensure that that term lean doesn't really mean much for us as a business, but actually being efficient is more important for us, and getting our staff to understand that, because like you say, it all impacts on the customer at the end of the day. That's always the end point of everything that we do.
Right.
And from a manufacturing point of view, when we started the business 40 years ago, it was definitely not a term I was aware of.
Right.
But you start a business and you try and do the best you can to make product. But right now, where we're making over 100,000 frames that are all different sizes, that are all bespoke, you're cutting up sheets of 8x4 MDF or acrylic or whatever you're doing. You have to ensure that you have as little waste as possible, so that you're maximizing your profit there, but you're also shortening the time that you make things, the more efficiently you cut things up. And all of the things that Craig talked about in terms of, watching your margin, watching your cash flow is really important. But ultimately, there's a dilemma, because sometimes you want to make things as economically as possible, but you also want to make things as well as possible. So you're constantly juggling that position. You don't want to make your product any less of a quality. What you want to do is to make it more efficiently. And
I was going to say, you've between the two of you, you've touched on the 4 outcomes that lean actually goes by, and around, you've talked about cash flow, cost reduction, efficiencies, making things better, and quality. And actually, one of the thinkers in lean, Shingo, one of the Japanese thinkers there originally, said the outcome should be making it easier to do things, and that's for the employees as well as for the customer to do business with you, make it easier. Make things better, and that's in the quality that you produce. Do it faster, absolutely. That's your efficiencies in the business, and ultimately do it cheaper. But Shingo also said you need to do them in that order. When you're focused on just cost reduction and making things cheaper, that's when you're on that race to the bottom.
Peter, I'm interested, when should lean be applied? And do you do it once and then forget about it?
No, it's interesting really. The process you're describing about your different businesses now, if you're looking, or we're working with a startup business or something, we apply sort of lean startup principles and use tools around that to explore new business models. It's along the idea that came from originally an entrepreneur in the States, Steve Blank, who wrote a book called The Four Stages of the Epiphany. And actually into that, his insight was that existing companies execute business models, but startups are really a vehicle to search for new business models. But I think that's very much evolved into existing businesses having to change and react much more quickly. So you're always adjusting your business model to some degree.
And I think that speaks to the entrepreneurial spirit of somebody who starts a business. Fundamentally, they are actually they have that creative process in their mind, even if they don't actually articulate it as lean manufacturing. When I started 40 years ago, I had absolutely no idea. I mean, the buzzword lean manufacturing might have existed at Toyota, but it certainly didn't exist in my head. But actually, purely by the fact that you're an entrepreneur, you do follow those principles, and they've become refined more and more. And the more one reads about it and the more expertise you get in the business, the more you can actually refine that down. So I think startups now are very aware of it, whereas in the past they were less aware of it, but we were doing it intuitively.
So actually, just coming back to 40 years ago, if you can remember, as a startup, and it's fantastic that you've been there. What were you thinking about in terms of, trying to create, cash is king and cash flow is king, especially at that startup stage and getting off the ground as a startup and thinking about how you could be really efficient in the way you used your cash?
Well, I think I alluded to the fact that lots of things were easier then. There was much less legislation. I went to the bank and just asked them for a loan, and there was no cost of doing that.
They were just handing out money, Keir?
They weren't just handing out money, but the bank manager lent us some money to start the business without any guarantees because we weren't able to give any.
Yeah.
It was you could actually go to a bank, and it was just down the road here in Brighton, and you could actually go to a bank and see a manager, and he could make that decision. So the first element of have you got any cash at all, but then managing that was a process. I mean, the first trade show that I went to overseas, to New York, I bought a standby ticket. I mean, it was really hand to mouth to start with.
I'm interested because even though you've been in business a long time, Craig, your business it's 7 years old?
Yeah, it's new in relative terms. It's new.
Yeah.
COVID, everyone obviously experienced the rush to the supermarket, everyone buying stuff off the shelves. One of the key things that we learnt there is the correlation between cost and revenue. And some companies felt that the hard way, because what you end up doing is buying stuff just without even looking at your just-in-time delivery system.
Right.
You're not even managing your costs. So in our business, it's very simple. Your revenue is directly correlated to your costs. There's a 33% GP that sits between the two, and it runs like that. Problem that you may have is if one dips into the other and you start losing money, and that margin is very, very difficult to keep an eye on.
Yeah.
What happened during COVID is a lot of our suppliers were pushing down the supply chain more product. You have to order more, we're going to run out. So we're stock holding more. Instead of having what we classify £50,000 worth of stock at any time in fresh produce, that went up to 85.
Wow.
But also the cost of purchase went up as well. So the inbound price went up, and this kind of sense of being lean at a team level just went out the window.
Right.
It was all just hand to mouth.
So if I can just challenge that, why did lean go out the window at a team level? Because you talked about it's really important about culture, and definitely, as I just said before, making it easier for your employees. And that's very much, and one of the underlying principles of lean is actually the team empowerment to help solve problems.
Let me just put it in context. We're talking about COVID here. It was a pandemic.
Absolutely.
Right? So when I pick up the phone to my EPOS provider, he's in bed. He's furloughed. So all the issues that we had then, and people didn't even want to come to work. We were frontline staff essentially.
Yeah.
We were at work right from the very beginning. All we were interested in was well-being. So there are certain stages where that piece about being a lean business model, it's just going to have to go.
I actually disagree with that. I don't think it needs to. I think, if anything, that's what helps keep the business together, by keeping it as a pure lean philosophy. And I appreciate there's lots of challenges around that in terms of how empowered employees can feel in that time. But they're the ones who've been working in these systems at the forefront of the business.
And that was a learning curve for us.
Sure.
We made a mistake, right?
Sure.
And that's what I'm saying. And that hurt in the back pocket.
Right.
But I think it's interesting.
Our margin there was an attrition there.
Yeah.
Craig has illustrated an interesting difference between certain SME businesses, in that your business is all about buying in product to sell. So you can actually aim for zero wastage. In our business, we know that we're going to have wastage. If you have a sheet of material that you can cut a certain amount of products out of, you know that, I would love not to have any wastage. So the less wastage we have has an environmental impact, but it also has a cash impact. So what our process is all about is, yes, we know we're going to have waste. How are we actually going to deal with that waste, and how are we going to minimize it? And actually, those two things are they're complementary, but we know we're going to have waste, but it costs us money to actually get rid of waste.
Yeah, of course.
And that's another environmental issue too. So we're constantly trying to find ways of maximizing the amount of efficiency that we deal with the waste. And
I'm sorry, Gabe, we're going to have to wrap this conversation up.
Sure.
And I feel like we could talk about this forever. Something that you mentioned there, which I think is really relevant to this conversation, is that different SMEs are going to have different challenges around lean and might approach it in slightly different ways, even though the principles ultimately are the foundation. What last kind of words do we have for some of those businesses who are trying to get more lean or have started their lean journey? What are some of the tips and hints that you can give people?
Well, from my perspective, it's not a once-only operation.
Great.
Lean is all about constant attention to that. There'll be innovation and technologies that change to enable you to do it, but also, as was alluded to, you need to keep the team on board. You have teams change, people leave, people come. So the culture of lean has to be something which is maintained and constantly looked after.
Fantastic. So essentially what we're saying is develop your own lean based on philosophies, but make sure that it's a culture and that it exists throughout the business.
Yeah, I think when you've got that culture in place and of a lean culture in place, then it becomes a platform, an enabler to actually grow from there, drive the innovation, bring in new ideas, and actually take your business forward.
And I would look for inefficiencies right through the process line.
Right.
So whether that's as far as I'm concerned, it's not necessarily about wastage. There's actually physical wastage and financial wastage. And inside the margin, you can actually waste just as much as you can in terms of product. So just be mindful of that. Things like payroll, the cost of doing business, payment charges, bank charges, the whole piece, stream right, that mobile phones, you name it, you can find efficiencies if you shop around.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting whether you're running, an active business that's been in business for 40 years or 7 years, or you're starting out and you've just got a great idea. It's all around how you do things efficiently, experiment, try things, experiment. And there are tools to do that at a startup stage, and there are processes to do that, as you're running an active business. So I think it's all those things really.
Great. We've actually got something that we'd like to show you all, which I'd like to get your comments on. So bear with me.
Whether you are a large manufacturing business or a smaller firm, the following is a useful tool to help you identify areas of waste within your processes and systems. One of the key principles of lean is the need to reduce waste to create flow, where waste is seen as any activity that doesn't add value. The model is called Downtime, where each letter represents one of the 8 significant wastes. Let's take a look. D stands for defects. Focus on quality. Defects in products or mistakes in services are costly and could also damage your reputation. O is overproduction. This mainly refers to too much finished goods, but could also be creating too many reports or spreadsheets for services firms. What a waste if you have to scrap your product or bin some of those great ideas you worked so hard on. W stands for waiting. We all know the saying, time is money. If you or your team are spending time idly waiting for something else to happen, then you are not being productive, and this could be quite expensive in the long run. N is non-utilised talent. For larger businesses with employees and teams, are you right-placing people with the right skills, in the right jobs, and at the right time? For smaller businesses, consider outsourcing the work to specialists and concentrating on what you do best. T, transportation. Logistics and transport is big industry, shifting products globally or locally. So what is the quickest, safest, cheapest, and most environmentally sustainable way for you to receive deliveries and send orders to your customers? I, inventory. Inventory needs storage space. And unless you can shift it very quickly, then you are potentially costing your business a lot of money in storage. In the case of stock, less really is more. M, motion. How much time and energy is wasted in your business with moving around? Do you hop around to different meetings in different locations where it could be more effective to do video calls? Is your workshop set up so operators can move around easily? Configure your workspace to make it more efficient. E is extra processing. A former engineering colleague once said to me, if your customer is only paying for a Fiat, then why are you trying to produce a Ferrari? Don't produce extra quality or features that customers just won't pay for. So there you have it, Downtime, a simple model to reduce waste and create flow.
Fiona, why are lean principles so important to the innovation cycle?
Well, I believe lean is really the bedrock of innovation. And what I mean by that is if you get your processes and systems in place, that they're running efficiently, that you've trimmed the fat, the waste from your business, and you know what you're doing, and it is easy for your teams to come in and do their work and know what they're doing, that they're focused on quality, that you have a great culture around empowerment of your teams, then they are in a fantastic place being at the forefront of what you do and operating your actual business, that when you have something that you need a problem to solve, they're there to be able to help you solve that problem and therefore innovate. And that's what continuous improvement and incremental, sometimes radical innovation is all about, is coming out of problem solving and thinking about the voice of the customer ultimately, because that's what we're trying to do, create that flow of value back to the customer. So that's lean leading to innovation and sort of some fundamental principles around what happens in the business.
Can I ask the table a question? To the layperson, isn't lean just common sense?
Well, if everything was common sense, why isn't it commonly done? So always my answer to that common sense question.
Yeah.
So.
But you see where I'm going?
Yeah, I think it's more to do with, it is common sense, but it depends on how engaged you are as an employee. I think that's the key thing, because, in a wonderful environment, in the best case scenario, everyone that walks through your business every morning is fully switched on and engaged and looking at efficiencies. It never happens.
We live in the real world.
So when you walk past and see something on the floor, and I'd leave it there until someone comes to pick it up, because it's common sense. You have to pick the thing up off the floor, but it's just engaging your staff. And I think one of the big problems that SMEs have is we don't have the financial leverage that a bigger company may have, i.e. big salaries, big performance bonuses, that kind of thing. So you have to do it in a slightly different way in terms of engagement, make them feel empowered, and they own the business as well. And that's really a tough thing to balance out.
It's a cultural thing, though, isn't it?
Sure.
Yeah.
And I think also, having that title, so as Craig says, running a business is so multifaceted, and there's things that you have to do. You've got the health and safety of your staff. You've got to service the customer. You've got to make product. So you're dealing with all of these various things. And so actually occasionally to think, and there's a title there called Lean. We need to make sure that we keep looking at that in the same way that you need to keep looking at other aspects of the business, which are sort of easier to leave. For example, just maybe painting the entrance area, which you don't have to do every 2 years or whenever, but you need to keep those processes going in your head. And I think lean is something that you constantly need to revisit, because if you don't, bad habits form. And before you know where you are, everybody's accepted that as a bad habit, and it's just an inefficiency
So
that everybody
it's good to have
buys
it for
into.
clarity of message.
Hugely important too.
Well, on that, Peter, are there models to help clarify that messaging that you would use for somebody at the beginning of their journey?
Yes, if you're developing a new business, there are tools that you can use, and they kind of build on areas like business model canvas and the lean startup principles that started really more around the software industry, to be honest. It was very much around designing your product with the customer, which kind of has a lot of resonance with what we've been talking about today, as opposed to for the customer. And a lot of software engineers would be to some extent happier probably developing the product to a much greater extent than taking it out and if you like, exposing it to the customer at an earlier stage.
I think that's a really interesting comment, because my son is involved in a startup, and when I talk to him, I'm incredibly impressed at the headings that they have and how they're following these processes. So it's turning theory into practice, and it often makes me think, we should be doing that. We should be doing that because they're turning very direct theory into practice, whereas we've been much more organic in our growth, and I've had to learn as I go along, whereas they're actually starting from a higher level, and it's hugely impressive.
It's interesting, isn't it? In an earlier part of my career, I went through something quite similar to you, and now move into working with startups and scale-ups, and it's very much around helping people think through and evolve the business model, test that and validate it as much as they can. So kind of coming back to lean, it's about zero waste. You don't want to go out there, because we all know no business plan ever survives talking to the market.
I think you hit the nail on the head there. It's all about the planning. It's all in the detail at the very end. I mean, you said it grew organically. We were very different. I mean, we went into the finite details of everything, planning cash flow, because we had a very tight budget, not dissimilar to yourself, Gare. But for me, I come from a background where planning is key.
Right. But I think that's where things have changed.
Important.
So, I mean, I wish I'd had a business plan when I first went to get a bank loan. I had no business plan. It was just an idea and a notion. So actually, that was 40 years ago. Now, you wouldn't get a loan without a business plan.
Exactly.
And so all of the things that have started to grow aren't just buzzwords. No. They are really important. Yeah. And we were probably the last sort of era when we could actually grow organically without much idea of what we were doing.
The bank manager now is a computer anyway. So.
Exactly.
What I'd like to do as we wind up this conversation, I'm sorry, and we've got so much to talk about. I'm interested to hear what we've learned from this conversation, because obviously we're coming from quite different perspectives, but there are so many similarities.
Sure.
I'd like to just go around the table, if that's all right. Starting with Peter, what's come out of this conversation for you?
What I'm hearing is a lot of adaptability, a lot of agility in your businesses. You have to constantly kind of reassess, not only from the products and the services that you supply, but also from, bringing people in to work within the business. They seem to be wanting to work more for the why of what your business does than the what of what your business does.
Purpose is important.
I think it's really important that business have to adapt to that, take that into account. It's not just about the process in the business.
Great, thanks, Peter. Fiona.
It's fascinating having these discussions, and I think we're still actually very much aligned as I listen to you about what Lean is about and can offer in terms of supporting innovation in a company. And for me, it is absolutely about adaptability, but it's about helping you frame what you do. It's not meant to be prescriptive in terms of the tools that are there trying to shoehorn your business into the tools. Lean and the philosophy and the principles, if you think about it as a philosophy and a framework, it can help you shape your business and grow your business rather than being led by tools itself.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Fiona. Gare.
I probably don't know how little I know. I think in terms of
rubbish,
it just redoubles one's view that we have to take every single facet of the business, particularly this Lean is ever evolving, and we just need to pay more and more attention to it.
Right, fantastic.
And I think for Gare, you've probably forgotten more than I know in your 40 years of experience. And I mean, for me, that's the key point, is just to let go. You don't have all the answers. Just be confident enough in yourself to say, I'm going to learn something here. And learn from everyone's experiences and just try and take a step back and find time. Because we set these businesses out for a reason, right? Because we're passionate, we have an ambition for them to succeed. You should never let that piece go, in my opinion.
Fantastic. Thanks ever so much for the conversation. It's really helpful.
Driving lean processes through the company is key to scaling. Lean thinking helps businesses to continuously improve, drive financial performance, and pivot quickly when customer feedback or external shocks require an immediate response. I'm Fiona Bennett, Lean Thinking and Continuous Improvement Consultant at Sussex Innovation. Lean businesses aim for 4 key outcomes. Firstly, making it easier for you and your employees to do the work, and easier for your customers to do business with you. Second, focus on quality and driving better customer experience and satisfaction. Thirdly, improving efficiencies and getting things done faster. Remember, time is money. And finally, reduce your costs to make things cheaper and improve your cash flows. To achieve these outcomes, the key is to reduce wasteful activities from processes and systems, creating flow of value to your customer and ultimately your business. There are a number of tools that can be used, including the downtime model that was shown earlier. You also need to be paying close attention to the voice of the customer and be able to record and analyze this information. Now, this could be as simple as using customer feedback forms at the local farmers markets to more sophisticated electronic point-of-sale systems connected to your accounting software. Whatever method you choose, keep it simple, keep it consistent, and it needs to be insightful for you to improve the ways you do business. Ultimately, for an organization to be truly lean, the principles need to be adopted top-down, from the leadership through to the teams, empowering employees to recommend improvements. Where it is done in collaboration with other staff or departments, it breaks down silos and fosters a culture of continuous improvement. This, in turn, becomes the bedrock for incremental innovation.
Thanks for watching. In our next episode, we'll be looking at leadership and at the processes that will underpin your innovation plan and the people who will help you to put it into action. Make sure you join the conversation with our business community by clicking on the Discuss button found on the Learning platform. Also, keep an eye out for the next Q&A session, where our experts will be online and ready to answer your questions around lean thinking.